stick that on record, and okay, she's asking a second time now, so I'm just going to.
Where's this now? Where you taking me? There's so much I gotta do, so much I wanna see. Choosing where to show another side, like the smile so far is
Okay.
Thanks, Mel, for doing this.
No problem. Is the sound and everything okay for you?
You sound great, actually. Yeah, that Welsh accent is coming through so melodically. It's a great accent. It's a really, of all the accents out there, the Welsh accent has music, I think.
Well, possibly, but just like the Irish.
Yeah, maybe. Don't know. Yeah, no, I think we're set up nicely. I never prepare for these sorts of chats. And sometimes I say, well, maybe I should, but obviously my brain would be thinking throughout the day, well, I'll ask him this or I'll ask him that. And then I don't, but we're here anyway. So, yeah. I came across you, the internet, YouTube just seems to give me, I think I came across you a year or so ago. I think your first video maybe came up, but it would seem that this particular, I don't even know what we're talking about, but this thing hit you at a very young age. That's the one thing, and that's kind of getting into a story, but something hit you years ago, isn't that it?
Yeah. Well, we can only talk in story. We can't talk about what I always call the ocean. So there's no point trying in a way.
Yeah.
All we can talk about is story or measurements or things that happen in time and space.
Yeah.
But the paradox of the whole conversation is that thing we call time and space is what's being talked about.
Yeah.
So we can talk about coffee and it's the same.
Yeah. And you see, for me, that's seeking something other. Because somebody said to me, what would you think it looked like liberation? And then I start bullshitting. Sounds like rubbish coming out of my mouth. Sounds, I know in my heart of hearts, it's like saying, it's like a Bentley, the Bentley cars, or it's like, or I was talking about a trip to the Caribbean. It would be the same, seeing somebody in a picture that I have in my mind of the Caribbean, and maybe I might be able to say that the warm water would touch my feet, and I might get served a pina colada on the beach by somebody lovely and whatever. But it still would be, and what do I expect from that? Or, yeah, is there a thing called liberation? Is there liberation?
You can equally talk about messiness and the paradox of life and pain and creation and destruction. You know, what's being talked about is everything. And of course, if characters are being quite poetical, it can be talked about in like the positive in a way. And that's understandable because it's a bit like falling in love, really. It just explodes in the body, really. But equally, if we spoke about the messiness of life and the quiet despair that's often in life, we're literally talking about this ocean. So everything we talk about has two sides, two edges to it in a way. So I'm resistant to just talk about the sweet candy floss side.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing. I like the idea that it has to be everything, but still within that everything, we'll say is I have an idea that I have an idea in my mind that a few people see the everything, and I don't see the everything. And that's from I might have glimpses or experiences in my life, but in the truth of it all, I feel that I don't see life as it is. I see it through this idea of how it should be or shouldn't be. Or, sorry, my bloody phone went there. I'm just going to make sure it's off now. Yeah, so in this everything, I have an idea that I'm missing something, and that perhaps you have seen it, or whatever. There's you see, the one thing with this is you kind of speak in a certain way, and it's you can't. When I say you have seen it, then sometimes in these conversations goes, well, nobody sees it. But that, for me as a person, I find that frustrating.
Well, that's the problem of knowing or knowledge, really. In a sense, knowledge, which has great utility, also has an underbelly, as it were. It also creates, shall we call, like a shadow, or what I call the illusion of knowledge. So everything that you've just voiced are what I term like measurements. When we're making comparisons between one edge and another edge, and we're calling one enlightenment and one non-enlightenment, or knowledge and ignorance. But possibly there's no such thing as ignorance. There's just the illusion of knowledge that's happening. Because what do you really know, Frank?
So beyond and everything that I know is based on what somebody has told me or I've read in a book. Beyond, if I can park all that for the moment, I don't know very much. Right. So what do I know? Well, we're having some sort of a podcast thingy, or we're chatting maybe. Are we even chatting? We're having there's sounds here. Something happening maybe. That's what I can say. Something is happening. That's beyond forgetting all the ideas. There's something happening. There is something appearing to happen.
Yes.
And that's it.
And all that, the only thing we can know is a comparison between two different things, or what I've always called edges. Our whole body, this is before language happened, just from our physiology, we just run on I've always called it an edge protocol. Our bodies needed an edge, really, to survive. The same as we do today. We're always looking for an edge. What can make us different, or what angle we can have to enhance our well-being, or our money, or our relationships. We're always looking for that sort of edge, because that's how we're designed. Our five senses and our brain are designed to magnify edges in a way, and to make comparisons to support our replication, really, our survival. Because we didn't have the luxury or the interest in knowing what is, if we term it like that, or the truth, or even happiness. When the body wasn't interested in that, it had to move, basically. So it just had to make an edge comparison to figure out the best ways of moving to enhance its replication and expansion. And it's the same process that is functioning today. And it's all completely understandable and natural. But the one problem of all these measurements we make to make this map work, as it were, to enable our organisms to move more effectively, our brains predicted, as it were, that all these edges must have a center, a something, a thing. So all our knowledge comes from a comparison of edges. It's relative, it's temporal, and totally a comparison between two or more edges. And we've predicted that there's a center to these edges called a thing, called a franc, called a tree, called a cup, called coffee, called times, called space, and it goes on and on. But we have never known what an apple is, or time, or space, or Frank, or Paul. We have never met a separate something. All we've ever known are comparisons between one edge and another edge. And that's where knowledge comes from. It's a little bit like electricity knowledge is. Electricity isn't in the positive pole or the negative pole or in the space between the poles. It's only when you put all those edges together, as it were, does electricity appear. So knowledge appears in the relative relationship between edges, which is how the five senses developed. And to create a simplified map, as it were, because we had to move quickly, so maps had to be quite simple. So we simplify our maps by negating most information, because we can't process the immense complexity of all the information, of all the data that's being presented. So our five senses already simplify and simplify and simplify down to the edges that really it deemed had utility. And those edges that had utility, we predicted, we made them into things, as it were, by predicting that there must be a center to these edges. That this comparison, which I call a tree, there must be a separate center to this thing called tree. And then as the brain sophisticated, it developed this rocket fuel, in a way, that increased its ability to move. It increased its dynamic range hugely, because it was able to create a subjective edge, appearing to be separate from an objective edge. Instead of there just being like a primitive animalistic immediate response to stimuli, it enabled itself to, as it were, stand back from its experience, from its map, and overlay the possibilities, when it was able to create that, in a way, another protective edge, which we call the subject, the me. And when I was able to stand back from that animalistic map, suddenly our ability to make choices, or our range of movement, increased, just exponentially. And so humans, as we know them, became top of the pyramid, as it were. And then those edges, which we made into things, which are it's all a brain process, then develops into what we call a cultural process, really. The things then become simplified into the things that had most utility, were given more meaning, like a hierarchy. And those things that had more meaning become beliefs. And this then becomes a shared cultural dynamic, really, a cultural knowledge. And those beliefs, in a way which were solidified, or even more, became our truths. The map or the model we use to function or to move in life. And then you have that slight little problem of a truth coming back into contact with life again. It's like the rubber hitting the road again, where there's always a friction. There has to be a friction, because it's always, in a sense, receiving new information. and that new information has to be fitted into the existing model, as it were, or rejected. But there's always a constant friction. There's always a constant, in a sense, imbalance in the system. So the system is very much interested in new edges, because new edges could be, in a very primitive way, could be food, or could be, or I could be the food. The new edges are the most interesting aspect of information coming in. So our brains and our senses tend to give new edges a lot more. In a way, they magnify them, but by negation, they negate what they think they know, the system knows, by making it slightly boring in a way. Well, I know that's a cup and saucer, so it becomes it draws less attention from the systems, but the new edges draw a lot more attention. So the brain using attention in a way, it's a bit like a camera. Wherever the focal length of a camera is, things come into focus. So the system, wherever it puts its attention, that in a sense is magnified into focus, into knowledge. We, in a sense, the relative relationship between two edges, one of which is your body and one, say, the environment, in a sense, brings into name and form, into time and space, an essence which is immeasurable, which has no edges, because it's not a something. We can only make measurements of edges. We can only know if there's a gap in a way between a this and a that, a subject and an object, a male and a female, a past and a future, a sweet and a sour, loud and silence. We can only, all our knowledge comes out of these comparisons of these edges. But the brain, this is like eating the apple in the Garden of Eden, the apple of knowledge. The trade-off of this huge utility, this knowledge, was the prediction that there must be a center, a separate center to these edges, that the object must have a separate center, whatever that may be. And this subject, which is just another object, as it were, also has a center called a me. But an objective center, or indeed a subjective center, has never been experienced, has never been found, has never been known. Because this thing we can't talk about, we can just have this sort of drunken conversation about it, has no gap. There is no relationship between two things. So it cannot be talked about. So in that sense, anything that can be written in a book or talked about cannot describe the immeasurableness of this ocean, of what is. I often call words a bit like a spade. They're brilliant for digging holes into the ground and building foundations and building any sort of structure you want on those foundations. But when we come to the ocean, the spade is not very effective to dig in holes. To try to get to the bottom of it is an impossibility and also very exhausting.
Yeah, no, but
Using an inappropriate tool.
Still, though, I felt drunk there listening to you. Like it's the way you describe, it's like a drunken conversation for a moment. I did feel flowing, but that's a description of this formation and solidity of a self, that it's
how the formless appears to be a form, and they're not two. We have to be very careful with words because we are having a drunken conversation. But in a way, all these words will be vomited out. Anything said will be vomited out. Any measurement will be vomited out.
What do you mean by that when you say that?
As
Vomited
not
out?
needed, as inappropriate.
Just raw mush, just blah, blah, blah.
But the paradox is that whatever measurement or whatever appears is what we're talking about. The only ever, if you could say that, is the illusion that this knowledge has created, that there must be a center to the measurements we give to sight, sound, hearing, touch, taste, thoughts, feelings, that all these measurements of these edges have a center. There are no things, Frank. There are no centers. There is no thing ever been born. So what we're talking about is an apparent movement, as it were, called time and space, but with no mover. What we're talking about is seeing, but there is no separate center that is a seer. It's just a movement, a measurement called seeing. And these edges, again, paradoxically, are edgeless edges.
That's the no separation. Is that what you mean by that? That's
yeah. The separation only, or we could say change, only appears in the relational, in the measurements. But the intrinsic isness of this immeasurableness cannot be measured because it doesn't need measurements. So it's like the waves can change on an ocean, but the intrinsic wetness of the ocean is unchanged by the appearance of waves or no waves. And they become edgeless waves, if a little bit like the Indians have a lovely analogy. They always say, is there such a thing as a gold necklace? Is a necklace and gold, are they different things?
you asking me that?
Yeah.
I thought I thought that was. Are a necklace and gold different things?
Yeah. If I make you, I fall madly in love with you and I make you a gold necklace.
Yeah.
And I say to you, Frank, look at this beautiful thing I've made for you. It's a gold necklace.
Yeah.
I say, and then I ask you, are the gold and the necklace different things?
No, I would say.
No. Otherwise, I could give you the necklace and keep the gold.
Yeah.
So likewise, all these forms, as it were, all these measurements are in a way borrowed. All there is gold. All there is ocean. What I've called ocean since being a 16-year-old. Or, whatever name people want to give this. There never was a separate something which was a necklace. In the sense, all these apparent forms just borrow their wetness, as it were, from the formless, from the ocean. There's no gap between what we call form and formless. There's not two. So drinking coffee is what's being searched for. Everything is in that. The hearing of a sound, the hearing of a voice, the response to a voice, the wetness in all of these apparent movements is what we're talking about, is the ocean. And the necklace was never born, never dies. They're just relative relationships which are temporal and totally dependent on comparisons. There are no things.
For a time in this, you see, you kind of use your mouth and your brain try to. Well, your brain definitely. You mentioned words, but your brain tries to kind of get a hold of what you're talking about, and through what you're saying, comparisons are made, and so normally you can go, but that's like that, so that equals that. But the more you talk, then the brain just goes, well, no, and so then it's flatline, and now I seem to be talking, but I do kind of reach this. This is so. It's like I don't understand you. I don't understand. So this is a pink. This is a pink cup, and there are the edges of it, and that's empty space around it. And this thing is Frank, and there are glasses, and that's the computer screen, and it's everything is a thing.
Everything is a comparison. Everything you've just described is a comparison. You haven't described anything.
But there's a cup. Is that that's a cup?
It's a cup in relationship to the space around it, or to the fluid inside it. But what is fluid? Is there a separate something which is fluid that you know?
Well, now there's water.
But do we know what water is?
Without the label of it. But see, how I navigate through this is through labels and things and names. So
Yeah,
I call that water, and it's a
that's-
real thing. When I hear what you're saying, when I can take that away, then it's everything. It's like the painting without you have a painting, and you don't just take one thing out of the painting. You have the whole painting. You have a kid playing in a forest and blah blah blah, but it's the whole painting. It's not just one thing. So that's painting. I think what you're saying is this is everything.
but the everything is the something, is the measurement. The cup and saucer.
So I know, but so everything is. It's what's happening. It's what's happening, and that is beyond. It's not controlled. There's just what's happening. Is what
it's beyond measuring.
Is there just
beyond,
what's happening?
It's
Is that what you're
beyond.
saying?
Yeah, it's beyond. Be careful of my words. It's beyond. It doesn't need measuring. What is, because it has no edges, it's immeasurable and is self-evident. It doesn't need any measurement to put something into a knowing box. Something can only be known if it can be compared to something else. But what this ocean is has no other, so it has no relationship or comparison to another something. So this is the difficulty for using a measuring device called our brain and our five senses as the tool to try to put into a box what has no edges. So knowledge will just always go round in a loop.
Yeah, but for a moment there, what I thought you were saying is that there is just everything. There's just this, and whatever is coming out, and whatever sounds are being made, and then on top of that, there is a feeling of. But there's just, you see, there's the sense of being someone in the world. You operate in time and space, so the thisness of everything, the just here. How that's the just what the fuck? Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit dumbfounded here at the moment. Yeah, what were we talking about?
Cups of coffee and tea and sounds and
Water.
simply, like you said, just what's happening.
Yeah. But you see, then how the fuck? How do you know that? There's how is it possible that it's known?
Well, it's the one thing that doesn't need knowing, and knowing can only, knowledge comes out of the relationship between two or more things. That's where knowledge emerges from, like electricity. When you have two or more edges, you can have time and space. You can have knowledge. This thing we call knowledge, and it has huge utility.
Yeah.
And it's the way the physiology developed. The physiology and the brain developed to enhance the ability to, in a sense, it just responded, the physiology responded to the stimuli, to its environment. And it had to move, it had to respond, which is like a movement. And so it just found the edges which had the greatest, what it felt had the greatest utility to give it an edge so that it could move and replicate and survive. But it couldn't take it on board the immeasurableness of life. It's just too immeasurable. So it had to simplify and simplify. So the five senses already started the process of simplifying the data it brought in, the edge that it became aware of. So like in our visual spectrum, we only, I think, as far as we know, see about 0.0035% of the electromagnetic spectrum. Everything else, physiology deemed as lacking utility, so it excludes it. It didn't respond. It only responded to those edges which had greatest utility, because it had to move. It was designed to survive and replicate and expand. It, as I said, it wasn't interested in what is, or happiness, or any of these more sophisticated ideas. It was just interested in finding food and not being food, in that sense. So the five senses simplify and simplify and simplify this information. And then with the development of the brain was able to, in a sense, create a simplistic map of these edges. And then we were able to produce what we call like a primitive animalistic response. It was almost like a two-dimensional map in a way, in which there was a stimulus and a response. But when the brain became more sophisticated or developed, whatever word you wanted, it was able to create another protective edge, which we call this subjective edge. It was able to create the appearance that there was a subject and an object. It could stand back from its animalistic map. So instead of just responding, it was able to stand back and in a way overlay other maps, other possibilities onto that animalistic map.
But if you just take here, right?
Yeah.
Just this, as opposed to well, how this sense of being someone in this world, and that it's time, 1975 is real, and it's 2019, and it's Friday. If you just say this conversation here, which is this happening right
Yeah.
here, right now. What is this then? Is it what's happening here?
A conversation.
A conversation.
The only thing that can be described or known is that sort of time and space relationship. But this ocean,
And can the ocean recognize itself as an ocean?
it has no needs. And there can only be recognition if there's two things. It's more simplistic. It's so simple. It can't be measured. It can't be put into a measurement. In 40 years, I've never been able to come close to, because we're just using language which is completely born out of measurements, out of time and space, to try to express or describe something which has no edge, has no measurement, has no comparison, is not in a relationship with something else. It's not in a relationship to something called knowing or ignorance, or birth and death, or creation and destruction. It's not in a relationship to any of those measurements. They're all real measurements, but the movement, the actual movement, the measuring is what we're talking about. So the brain is brilliant at everything but describing what is.
I'd say this sense of self, or feeling that you know the world, but you're this tiredness or this bored of this knowing, because you realize it's kind of it's like it's a dry sort of, that knowledge is dry, sort of non-experiential. It's just a loop. It's just the same safe loop, right?
Well, knowledge in itself isn't. It's just again, because knowledge creates that appearance that there is a center, or shall we call a knower.
Yeah.
It thinks it knows what a cup is. And
Yeah.
so it becomes boring, because I've seen this cup umpteen times.
Yeah.
So the boredom doesn't come from knowledge. It comes from that shadow of knowledge, as it were, that sense that there is a knower, and that knower feels separate from what it deems to be a separate cup. And that's where the boredom, because inherently the sense of separation is unsatisfactory.
Yeah.
So again, that movement called Frank is designed to keep the movement going, it has to be dissatisfied. And again, nature has designed you to be permanently dissatisfied. Be careful of my words. I'm not talking, there are no centers. There is no separate something which is frank. But nature itself, in a sense, I often laugh, it's the originator of consumerism and fake news. That's how it keeps itself going. Because it overpromises, like a good advertising company will do. It'll overpromise this product or this pleasure to get you to move towards it. And when you have it, it'll deliberately diminish the pleasure to leave a sense of dissatisfaction, because it wants you coming back for more. And not only does it do that in the memory, it'll enhance the memory of the expectation and diminish the memory of the dissatisfaction, to keep the movement, to keep the loop going. So nature is has always been the expert in fake news and consumerism. It's the originator of it. It overpromises and underdelivers by creating fake news, that there is a something that you can get, because you're a something, that when you get it, you'll feel satisfied. You'll feel more complete.
Yeah.
And that's the con, because it's designed very opposite to that. It's designed to keep the organism moving. So there's no point you having a cup of coffee and being satisfied for the next 6 months, because you'll probably die in the spectrum of evolution. You won't replicate and survive. It needs you to move and replicate to the exclusion of all else, in a way. Because even that movement, which we call evolution, that movement, or what I call these edges, these edgeless edges, are what is, they're be careful of my words, they're like echoes of the infinite. The movement will never be satisfied until it swallows the whole of time and space, in a way, until it has everything, until it is everything. Because it's an echo, in a way, of what is. Careful of these words, are a bit poetic and a bit drunk. Because the movement, because it's created this illusion that there is a center, there is a something, in this context of this conversation, and me, it'll never be happy, because that appearance of a center, a separate something, is just fake news. It's built on nothing. It's built on a lie. So it's like trying to satisfy a pink elephant. It's an impossibility. So the system is designed to be dissatisfied.
But that system isn't real, did you say?
I don't understand these words, real and unreal are only comparisons between edges. What we're talking about has no edges. You know, it's equally wet or equally free in whatever measurement you call real or unreal. So you can only use that term in relation to specific edges in time and space, or what in science I think they call model dependent truth.
See, then I get the idea that you see what you're saying is more valid than what I'm saying. That yours is closer to this wetness than what I'm saying.
But that's the illusion of knowledge, the illusion that there is a separate center called Frank and a separate center called Paul who knows something. That's the fake news. That's the lie. And it's kept going by that constant movement. In a sense, the non-existent center keeps its appearance by continually moving.
Yeah.
Like kids, you remember sparklers?
Yeah.
Doing fire, and you keep it going hard, fast, and it appears that there's a solid circle of sparkle.
Yeah.
And it takes a load of energy to keep that appearance going, because as soon as that movement stops, it's seen that there isn't a circle.
Yeah.
So the me is a little bit, the appearance of the me is a little bit like that. The physiology has to keep feeding it, like it keeps feeding the body to keep the body replicating. It has to keep feeding the story of me, because without the story, there's no me. Without the movement, there's no me. Without the movement, there's no time and space. So these words we use, time and space, me, the story of me, are all words for the same thing, really. So nothing can be said about this. Anything that can be said about this is not this, while paradoxically being this.
Yeah, I mean, I have this kind of love-hate thingy going on with this interest in non-duality, or let's just say seeking. And there's loads of times I kind of go, I mean, I've spent a lot of time, let's just say, or 8 years interested in it and not interested in it and whatever. But I keep going, well, hopefully I just stop now. Can I just stop being interested in this and move the fuck on, leave it, let it go, just forget about it? And there's one time there's the thought of, well, that's the equivalent of death, letting it go. But then the other is, okay, well, let's just see what happens. Can I just forget about it entirely? And I can't seem to just, but it's the kind of, it's only the only thing that I'm really sort of interested in. And it's absolutely nothing at the same time. And it's kind of, you get this feeling of, well, what even am I interested in? By being interested in this sort of, this everything.
It's
trying to figure it out and blah, 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 that movement.
It's a bit like, over all these years, it's like in some characters, once this itch begins, once the genie in a way is out of the bottle, there's no way of putting the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
I've never met anybody over 40 years that could put that genie back in the bottle. It's a pain. It can be a real pain in the arse. In many ways, it's better not to have the genie out of the bottle.
Yeah.
In a really practical utility point of view.
Yeah.
But once the genie's out, there's no going back, Frank. Because there'll be no satisfaction with there being a separate something, with that appearance anymore. The cat's out of the bag in the way.
Yeah, I had that.
It will not be satisfied with the something. What we call the physiology, you could say, becomes very, very greedy then. It wants everything.
But also, it's kind of like, I don't actually trust any kind of thought I have about what I do want. I kind of go, oh, wouldn't it be great? And then I go, would it? I don't know. I mean, I don't really believe that. There's then the idea about this or getting this or doing this or whatever. All of those things just seem to be ideas that are more bullshit more kind of seeking, and there's no.
The movement is it's stillness moving. There's nothing wrong with the movement. The only
But wanting everything, what you said there is really
no,
like
it's
want
that
everything, yeah.
yeah, but it's the
Insatiable.
sense that there's a something that wants another something. That's where the headache comes from.
But also recognizing with that appetite is utterly insatiable, because it's like a starvation that can't be fed. It's kind of like, oh, what's enough? And then you go, well, then, do you know what I mean by that? That kind of seeking energy is kind of, well, what is enough? Like the entire universe? When does it end, this seeking thing? This wanting, needing, blah, 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 trying to know, understand this, that.
So what happens if there's all of that, all those movements, what you call seeking, but there's no separate something which is a seeker? What happens to that movement, whatever it is? Seeking, drinking, eating, talking, sleeping, waking. If there's no separate something that is a sleeper or a drinker or a waker or a seeker, what happens to those measurements, to that knowledge?
Oh, that's nice, yeah.
Yeah. That's the illusion of knowledge. It's a bugger. There's that biting that apple has a real trade-off.
Yeah.
We gain knowledge. Careful of these words. Knowledge was gained, but there was a price, as it were. Words are impossible, Frank.
Yeah, well, you do a good job, but because, like, I mean, it's funny when you're talking. There's no kind of just watching you. There's no kind of referring to. It just seems to be very. Maybe this is a bit of projection onto you, but it doesn't seem to be. Say, if I was telling you a story, I'd have to reach into the past to make a comparison. Whereas everything you're saying is kind of it seemed like just a spontaneous outpouring of whatever the fuck that was.
Because this conversation has no gap. This conversation is gapless, is ocean. There's no distance. It's
one and the same. Yeah.
It's difficult to use this word, but it's a love which has no gap, where there's no distance. The only place where there's distance and gaps is in knowledge, in the relationship between two or more apparent edges.
Yeah, I see.
This is why they use this word unconditional. It's unconditional because it needs no specific measurement. It's not interested in knowledge or ignorance. It's not interested in the measurements of 1 or 2.
See, when people talk about love and bliss and peace or whatever, even unconditional love, it's kind of like I feel like there's something wrong with me that I don't have. I don't really know what love is. There's my sense. There might be momentary things of whatever, but this idea of what is unconditional love or love in general, I seem to be just devoid of it, or I don't know. It seems to be alien.
Well, it's just another word that has to be vomited out in a way. Again, in this context, this love can never be known in that measurement sense, because it's in a way it's like a naked, ruthless love, because it doesn't see any other. because there's no gap. There is no other. So it's in a way it rips everything to the ground. It rips the whole of time and space, the whole of past and future, the whole of us and them, male and female, young and old, black and white. All these measurements just collapse. It rips. It ruthlessly rips everything apart, as it were. Again, that was a bit drunken. Put those words in a bit.
I mean,
But it's
you see the thing. The other day, I had this. The other day, I had this. I just was having it was a bad moment, and I just had this overwhelming wave of that's utter exhaustion. And I mean, it passed and it was all consuming, let's just say, but it was this. I don't know, this exhaustion with trying to get this, in a sense, this utter exhaustion, and sick of myself even saying that I'm exhausted. Not only am I exhausted, I'm sick of myself being exhausted, and there's just utter tiredness, and because it's obvious in a way that nothing to be. Sometimes it was feeling of there was this bang in your head against something, or go around in a circle trying to find. It just seemed like a pointless movement, and then all this vesting and trying to get it seems ridiculous. All of it just seems to, and then yet that was overwhelming. I'm exhausted. I'm in bits, whatever, and then it's kind of like I come back together again, reboot. It's like a reboot and a clawing back to okay to do. It's just when you said the word ruthless, I felt this this me trying to get this. Seems just like this stupidest joke ever, and yet I just can't seem to stop it either. It's like it's the worst addiction ever, and it's an addiction. It's an addiction almost. It's another survival, or I don't know. That's even something I've learned.
Yeah, it's in that sense, it's the most common drug being passed around, and one drug addict loves the company of another drug addict because they support each other's activity in a way. So that's what loops do. That's why, because the loop has to be continually fed to keep the appearance that there is a solid something called a me. Otherwise, it'll just, it does collapse many times anyway. But it has to be rebooted, as you said, into a semblance of balance again, without too much balance. You're not designed to have too much balance, because again, life needs you to replicate and move and expand. So it'll make sure it keeps you imbalanced. But saying all that, a spade can only be a spade. That's what those five senses, that brain, that physiology is designed for. So what the suggestion is, what happens if there is that movement, but no separate something which is a mover?
Yeah.
Nothing has ever been born, Frank. There are no things, including a thing called Frank. You know, so in that's just again all the illusion of knowledge. There is a something that can be balanced or imbalanced. They're just edge comparisons. It's all an edge protocol that this 5 senses in the brain of, for utility purposes, have modeled as a response to the stimuli of the environment. And then when it became more sophisticated, it's more like a dialogue now in which the environment molds the physiology and the physiology can mold the environment by creating by simplifying the data into things which have meaning and utility and belief and truth. You know, we solidify this map of how things are. Whereas never realizing that these edges have no center. These apparently different edges have no centers. There's no separate something which is an object and no separate something which is a subject. There's just measurement. Because it needs an edge. The body needed an edge to survive. Same as it does today. Always looking for an edge. How to make more money, or how to be the fastest person in the world, or how to attract a mate. We're always looking for an edge. Because that's the way this whole thing is. It's a spade. It's designed to do that. That's the knowledge. It's just the knowledge is created, predicted, intuited, like, because this is pre-intellectual thought even. It's created the energetic sense that there's a center by lots of...
But it is felt like whatever, a few seconds ago, I had the thought of, I don't know how to operate my eyes. I can't move my eyes are moving. I'm not moving my eyes. And because you see that, but I feel like, oh, I move my eyes. I am the one who moves them up and down, and I move my hands. But it's not. It is psychosomatic. This control is not just, oh, I believe. You know, you hear this stuff about, oh, it's just a thought. The sense of being somebody. It is a felt sense.
Yeah, no, thought came a lot later. This is prior to thought.
Yeah, the sense of being somebody. It's
the sense that there's a something, a center. The physiology creates that, because the only way it could make it had to have a map basically of how to move, and the way you get maps to function quickly and it does this miraculous job of like integrating all these edges and filling in the gaps, like our blind spot where there's no information. It fills in information, and it, like a camera grain, it stabilizes these sort of like edgy lines into like orderly holes and processes. It's like pattern recognition in a way. Sometimes it works so hard, there's all this information, then suddenly you can see a face in the pattern. It's a little bit like that. And the patterns that it found had utility. It predict to map those things that had utility by creating the sense that there's a center to those edges. Its mapping ability was just exponentially better. The dynamic range that gave that organism to move and respond to stimuli was like this rocket fuel, really. It just gave it so much more ability. That ability to create that protective edge, or that subjective edge we call a me. that could stand back from that primitive map and overlay other possibilities, other comparisons, just allowed movement to be 100-fold better, that we dominated everything else. But the physiology did that, enhanced that map making ability by predicting that there must be a separate center to these edges, while never ever having experienced one. All it experiences is the comparisons between edges. It's never known what a tree is. It's only a comparison between the space and a bush or a lion. It only knows that's a tree because of those comparisons. It's never known what a tree is, because there is no separate center to a tree. Like there's no separate center to that subjective edge, that protective mechanism we call a me. The center is an illusion. There are no things. No, literally, there's no separate something that's ever been born. There's just life. An immeasurableness that, through the relative relationship between two objects, two edges, one we call the body and the environment, in a way brings the immeasurable into a temporal name and form, a temporal comparison. And that mechanism is greatly enhanced by predicting or intuiting or sensing that there must be a center to these edges.
But yet there's no location for this center. Exactly. There's no center point.
Sorry, your voice went.
There's no center point. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
There's no center point to this so-called center. There's no place where I can say, okay, well, I'm here.
Yeah.
You know, or maybe here, or
There's just edgeless edges, and the comparison between them is where knowledge is based. And that knowledge has predicted that there must be a center to those edges called a you and a me. And that's the illusion inherent in knowledge. That's the biting the apple of knowledge in the Garden of Eden.
yeah, I've always been curious about that, biting up the apple thing.
All these stories that, you know, these drunken stories that people have made up to try to measure something which can't be measured. But when you're drunk, hey ho, let's go for it.
Yeah.
It sounded a good idea at the time. And many are so beautiful in their own way. But when they become...
You talk very different. The language you use is a lot different than other. It's just different. It's a different description, but it's the same. It's the same, but it's different in a way. I mean, it's
But there was nothing in my character. I was just a football boy. I wanted to be a professional football player.
okay.
When what I called the ocean, like, just smashed this thing. The appearance that there is a center, just smashed it, as it were. So I had no religious or spiritual background. There's no Google, no internet, because this is 40 odd years ago.
Yeah.
So it's just ocean and this luminosity, which was the football, which was the mum, and this body. There's all just these edgeless edges, this luminosity. So people just put into into words, into like a measurements, you know, things that are, I suppose, specific to that culture.
Sorry, you've disappeared. There, I can hear you, but
Um,
at the moment, unless you've moved out of the.
it's my phone, is the camera.
Ah, okay. So you've come in on your mobile phone, have you?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that's good quality for a phone. Must have a good phone.
it's, a, it's Apple.
It's Apple, yeah. Yeah. Speaking of the Apple, yeah.
Yeah.
I had this idea for, I had this idea for a movie in my mind, one that, because I think they're going to make technology edible. I just have that sense that to integrate it into the brain, that it will be edible, and Apple will have an edible piece of technology. And my kids will come to me one day and go, "Do you think it'd be okay if I eat this apple?" And I go, "No, don't." That'll be my reaction. But I do think that'll happen. That'll be kind of, I don't know. Would it be poetic?
I don't know. We're certainly living in interesting times.
Yeah, we are. Yeah,
Lots of just change seems to be speeding up dramatically.
yeah. For my kids and things, yeah. I think it's be different times.
So from like forgetting about ocean and non-duality, just from a, it seems we're entering into a time where I've got two boys,
Yeah,
and this conversation of understanding really how we're wired to create, or we function on fake news and consumerism in a way. So that's where the inherent problem is. So unless I would think it'll become more advantageous if people realize what their physiology is doing, which will then possibly help them navigate like information streams now that are just, well, there's an infinite number of them, and how do you separate out which is valid, which isn't valid? So the sort of world they're going to have to navigate will be a lot more complicated in many ways.
yeah,
So I think if they know how the tool that they're using, their physiology, how that works, might be a useful ability to have.
Well, the sense of, or the seeing that it's kind of just the striving energy. Do you mean this kind of seeing carrots, and by carrots that you can go after everywhere?
Yeah, that things out. Our physiology is designed on fake news and over promising.
Yeah,
and deliberately leaving the system in a state of imbalance or dissatisfaction, because it wants you to keep coming back, or wants you to keep replicating. I think is reflected in so many areas of modern life now.
Yeah, well, it's never, ever this. It's always the next thing.
And there's nothing, there's nothing inherently wrong in movement. It's again, it's just that the fakeness of knowledge is that the prediction that there must be a center, there must be a me that is a mover. Then the game becomes utterly different, as it were.
Yeah.
So if there's movement but no mover,
but
then that's a different dance.
But I mean, there's a lot of dancers, 7 billion dancers really now.
For sure. And in a way, there'll be 7 billion different ways that a character can get wet, I call it. It falls in the ocean.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem, again, after all these years, there doesn't seem to be any conditions necessary, or specific conditions necessary.
Yeah. I had the other day, I had the sense of how could there be a way to everything when it's everything? So the trying to get to everything is still everything. So how can there be a way to get there?
Yes, it just becomes a drunken dance in a way. You know, how, if there is that, how can you get closer to everything? It's an impossibility.
Yeah. Did you said the word "neverything"? Did I hear that in one of your conversations? The "neverything."
Yeah, I've heard a few. I originally heard it from an old monk.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, about 40 years ago. And he was quite a humorous guy. He must have been in his 80s, and he only ate bananas.
Did he?
He only ate bananas, and but the most he used to sit in the foyer and just speak to people. I don't know, 12, 14 hours a day about all sorts of subjects. He was a real encyclopedia in a way, and a very humorous, childlike sort of guy. But yeah, that's the first place I heard that word.
Everything. Yeah, you know that 7 billion ways to fall. Well, there is no conditions, or there's to fall. But so obviously, when there is when the separate sense falls into the ocean, it doesn't ever. There's no memory of being a separate self again. Is there? There's no way that it's not like it's. Say if I have a cup of coffee and I've tasted that cup of coffee from this morning, and now I can't remember, I've some taste in my mouth and I can picture the cup and the whatever, but this falling into the ocean is obviously it doesn't need anybody to go, here's your stamp of, as somebody said, as Robin said to me once, here's your stamp of approval. Paul doesn't need anybody to say, well, this is what's happened there. You know, that you've tasted the ocean. You don't need any validation for it. There's no certificate. There's no proof. There's no anything for that happening or that falling into the ocean. I know I'm making it something now, but
Yeah.
yeah, you don't. Oh, shut up. What can I do? Yeah. Don't even answer.
Sorry, it's the paradox of having a drunken conversation.
Yeah.
You know, by its nature, it functions in cause and effect, really.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about is unconditional. It has no cause or indeed effect. We're talking about something which never happens. It is just, it has more the flavor of it was just, careful of these words. It's like the end of something which never was. But even that that's just rubbish.
Yeah.
It's, you know, literally nothing happens.
Yeah. Anyway, I've always the sense of that I can taste the flavor of what you're talking about, as opposed to, there's no part. I mean, and it's kind of, it can taste the flavor of what you're talking about completely. That the everythingness, and so it's not. That's why I probably don't go. But that often, because I can. You know, I can. It doesn't. It's not. It's not. It doesn't seem like bullshit. It doesn't. And it's not. It's not that I understand it, or I recognize that the understanding is pointless. It's the flavor of it comes in when you're talking. It's like You know, when somebody's cooking something in the distance, you can get the smell, and your mouth can water. So whilst you mightn't be eating the steak, you still in this kind of conversation. Maybe I get to.
No,
For
there
me,
is.
there's a little bit of a flavour of it anyway. It comes into my mouth from time to time. So that's why I'm not going, rah, 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 Paul, that's bullshit. Or, you know, because I am that kind of a way. I like things to be proven. If somebody was to offer me some sort of a herb, and they tell me all this stuff about this herb will do wonders for your something. Unless it was a boom to my system, I'd go, I'm sorry, I didn't really feel anything. So I know what you're saying. Thanks. I give it a go, but I don't believe that this worked. It could work for other people, but not for me. Whereas this particular sense of the oceanness, oneness, everythingness is not an abstraction. It doesn't feel alien to me. To me. Yeah. Anyway.
Because what we're talking about in that sense, has no benefit. Because it doesn't need to have a benefit. Because again, it's free. It's equally free in
Bound.
benefit or non-benefit. It's not relational to all those measurements.
Yeah.
It's a drunken paradox. That
Yeah.
it can never be written about. It can never be verbalized. Whatever is said is not it.
Yeah, you can't catching.
Because there isn't a something. There isn't a something which is ocean or non-dual.
Yeah. That's you can't catch everything. You can't catch catching. You know, you can't.
Well, it's not that you can't catch it. It needs no catching.
You can't catch catching. You can't catch catching. You can't.
No.
You can't speak about speaking, because speaking is already it in a way. Is what you're saying, in a roundabout way.
Everything sings it. Every edge sings its edgelessness. So literally what's being apparently sought for is simply everything's in drinking a cup of tea. Or the sound of a voice. All these edges are just edgeless. Because there's no center. There are no things. It's just ocean. It's just this.
Oh. That's a nice way to end, I think. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. I'll send it on to you. This thingy. And thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Frank.
Cheers, man.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
See you.
Yeah. See you again.
Yeah, I'll drop you a note. See you.
Talking fills my head.
If you like the conversation that I just had and you'd like more, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you.
Frank, come on, man.